Fire Chargers Darkblade here, and since a certain VTuber I came across reacted to one of Redeemed Zoomer's videos going through supposedly every heresy group that claims to be Christian, I decided that I'm going to do the other one.
Do you believe church should be a giant sex party in upstate New York? Do you believe church should be meditating in a room for an hour?
What?
Do you believe we should start a church based on a failed prophecy? There are some
No.
groups that believe these things. Not all of these groups are equally weird or heretical.
Wait.
What they all have in common is not being descended from historic Christianity and not using the creeds of historic Christianity, so it's hard to tell how historically Christian they are. The Amish are probably the ones you're most familiar with. They're famous for being stuck in the 1700s. Their whole deal is separation from secular society and its technology and politics. That's why they not only avoid computers, but also things like swearing oaths in court, serving in politics, and the military. The Amish are directly descended from Anna.
Yeah, and I heard this on Religion for Breakfast channel that they was it called their milk refrigerators or whatever use old gas power. I don't know. It's been a while since I've watched that one.
Baptists who advocated a total retreat from society. Some groups that are indirectly descended from Anabaptists are certain groups of Baptists and evangelicals who tend to advocate a partial retreat from society. They still think Christians can participate in politics, but are generally very skeptical of mainstream universities and institutions. The Amish don't use the Nicene Creed or any creeds whatsoever, but they still affirm basic things like the Trinity, so they're much less heretical than some of these other groups from the perspective of historic Christianity. The Amish are
much less. I wonder, is this much less is different than zero? I wonder if this video contains any justification that Zoomer may provide for implying the Amish as any heretical at all.
Famous for their community loyalty, their selflessness, and their non-violence. You've also probably heard of the Quakers.
Okay.
I always wanted a brand of oatmeal named after my religion. The Quakers were very influential on American society, but most people don't know what they believe. So here's a video clip of some Quaker preaching and worship music. That's right, Quakers don't have any sermons, music, or sacraments in their worship. It's just silent meditation, and here's why. All historic Christians, whether Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox, believe that God reaches us through means such as the preached word and the administration of the sacraments. These are called means of grace. But Quakers believe that God reaches us directly, and so there's no need for any means of grace like pastors or sacraments.
And now I'm getting an ad.
For any means of grace like pastors or sacraments. The Shakers are like a...
In that case, like, if you don't actually do any preaching or anything, you just sit quietly and meditate. What's the point of even having a church for that at all?
Someone was at a wild dance party and said, you could make a religion out of this. They started out as an...
That is a reference to, what's it called? Bill Wirtz, who, is it called? Zoomer has another big video reference to Bill Wirtz. There's the history of the world according to the Bible and the history of the church, I guess. You could make a religion out of ecstasy.
Elliptic cult in England focused on gender equality and chastity. Then they moved to America and started having lots of spiritual experiences, which inspired them to dance and sing and write a lot of music. They became famous for their furniture making, and that's how they made money, but then their population dwindled, and now they're down to 3. Not 3 churches, 3. If the Shakers used dancing to achieve spiritual ecstasy, the Oneida community used,
So, I don't think it really got into Shaker theology or soteriology or any of their beliefs in intersection with Christianity at all.
But let's still use dance as a euphemism. They lived communally in this house in upstate New York, but they didn't believe in having babies. Luckily, they had a strategy to avoid that. They would pair the young men with the old women, since the old women can't get pregnant, and they would pair the young women with the old men, since the old men can control themselves. Yeah, I promise the rest of these groups are less weird. For example, the Disciples of Christ are pretty normal. They come from Alexander Campbell's Restorationist movement in the 1800s, which said all historic Christian denominations, whether Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox, are all corrupt and we need to start Christianity from scratch. This is not what the Protestants did. They're not Protestant. Protestants believe in sola scriptura, where the Bible is the highest and only infallible authority, but church tradition and church fathers are still lesser authorities. The Restorationists, on the other hand, believe the Bible is strictly the only authority whatsoever. They have a famous saying, no creed but Christ, no book but the Bible, which is funny because that is a creed. So the disciples of Christ don't...
Let me check. I want to know, did I already react to this? Okay, I checked, and I haven't already reacted to this video. So,
like a relentless
wait,
weed,
Shema?
moderate to severe ulcerative colitis symptoms can keep coming back.
Can you be Christian and believe the Bible? Which is funny because that is a creed. On the other hand, believe the Bible is strictly the only authority whatsoever. They have a famous saying, no creed but Christ, no book but the Bible, which is funny because that is a creed. So the disciples of Christ don't use the Nicene Creed, but they more or less believe what's in it, including the Trinity, so it's unclear how historic they are. If you see a church that's just called Christian Church, most likely it's Disciples of Christ. Of all these groups, they have the most mainline status, even if they aren't exactly mainline Protestant, because they're not Protestant. But they do have very traditional worship, they do have the same drift towards liberalism as the other mainlines, and they are very institutionalist compared to these other groups. They do found some institutions, including TCU, which itself should be considered a heresy. There's also the Churches of Christ, which are the more conservative, and they are very institutionalist compared to these other groups. They do found some institutions, including TCU, which itself should be considered a heresy.
On what basis is that said? Anyway, didn't really get into Oneida theology at much.
There's also the Churches of Christ, which are the more conservative branch of the same Restorationist movement. They're famous for having no instruments in worship, for having all local churches be independent, and for believing in baptismal regeneration. They're basically the only denomination that believes baptism saves but also doesn't baptize babies. Then there's the International Churches of Christ, which split from the Churches of Christ in the 1970s. They're a lot more hierarchical, and there are some accusations of them being more cult-like. Seventh-day Adventists also come out of the Restorationist movement in the 1800s, because during that time there was this guy William Miller who predicted Jesus would return in 1844, and when that didn't happen, some of his followers said he was right about the general idea of Jesus' return being imminent, but he just calculated the exact dates wrong. And then the self-proclaimed prophetess Ellen White said that Miller's followers were right all along. So Seventh-day Adventists...
So basically they're like, oh, yeah, he was right about that. October 23rd, 1844. Yeah, but you just got wrong what was supposed to happen on that day.
Was founded on some of her teachings, such as vegetarianism, a strict Saturday Sabbath, soul sleep, and annihilationism.
Yeah, it's weird. Some, was it called Seventh-day Adventists? And I know because I'm subscribed to one on YouTube, basically demonize our entire historical tradition. Because our entire historical tradition includes worship on Sunday, and this person said that worshiping on Sunday is going to be like the mark of the beast or something like that. It just, in my opinion, is intellectually incapacitated.
Idea that there's no hell and that those who don't go to heaven just stop existing, and
it's not that there is no hell. Position is that the hell is like a temporary place of punishment in which the condemned soul is burned until its substance is fully consumed and no more.
She was the first to teach a strict young earth creationism based on a dream she had about God creating the earth in 6 days. It's not clear if she believed in the Trinity, at least in the classical sense, and within Adventist history, many of its theologians have denied the Trinity, which is why they're in the borderline category.
Pitbull para la cabeza. Afeitadora. The Skull Shaver.
With Dupixent, stay ahead of moderate to severe eczema with clearer skin and less itch. The number.
You probably haven't heard of the Swedenborgians, but they
No.
were way ahead of their time.
Mm.
They were founded in the 1700s, but have similarities to much later religious movements like Restorationism, which tried to rebuild Christianity from scratch, and Transcendentalism, which tries to tap into New Age inner spirituality.
Yeah,
They were founded
if
by
what
this
he
guy,
says
Emanuel
about them,
Swedenborg.
The Swedenborgians, on that point is true, then they are definitely
From
heretics.
Sweden, making them the only denomination to ever come from Sweden, and he had a lot of mystical visions. He taught that salvation is by a deep inner transformation, not strictly by faith or works. He taught that the second coming of Christ had somehow already happened spiritually.
I don't think
And
that's
he
how it
rejected
works.
the classical idea of the Trinity as polytheistic.
Yeah,
He
that's
also taught that Christ had a human
definitely severe error.
body and a divine mind, which is the ancient Apollinarian heresy, meaning this is definitely one of the more heretical groups on this list. Next are the New Apostolic churches from the New Apostolic Reformation. Their origins are kind of crazy. The Holiness split from the Methodists because they didn't think the Methodists were methoding hard enough. Then the Pentecostals split from the Methodists who didn't think the Methodists were methoding hard enough because they didn't think the Methodists who didn't think the Methodists were methoding hard enough were methoding hard enough. Then the New Apostolic churches split from the Methodists who didn't think the Methodists who didn't think the Methodists were methoding hard enough were methoding hard enough because they didn't think the Methodists who didn't think the Methodists were methoding hard enough were methoding hard enough were methoding hard enough. The New Apostolics methoded so hard they became a hyper-charismatic group which believes in modern-day apostles that can pronounce spiritual authority, which usually means some sort of boomer televangelist Christian nationalism. Most of the Facebook grandma prophecies about Trump being some anointed savior of America came from these New Apostolic so-called apostles.
Is
Plymouth
Wolf one of
Brethren
them?
are basically a real version of what most Catholic apologists think Protestantism is. Because they don't see any distinction between ministers and lay people. They're all dispensationalist, meaning they believe in a pre-tribulation rapture before the second coming of Christ, and they reject most church traditions and any efficacy of the sacraments. It's no surprise that a surprising number of Catholic apologists started out Plymouth Brethren.
Is there any data on
So,
this?
if you are in one of these groups, although I highly doubt any of you are in this one, luckily, you might have
Good.
some
Take away the perverted creeps from the image.
connection to the Christian faith. But if you want to be part of historic Christianity, you need to join a church that's actually rooted in historic Christianity. Because despite all the differences between the historic Christian denominations, they can all unify around the Nicene Creed, which is the historic summary of the Christian faith. Also, if you want to support me on Patreon, so I can...
That's all for this video, and I will see you tomorrow, or maybe later today, depending on how long it takes YouTube to actually process and post this video.